Well, hello there, and welcome to the 131st edition of DF Direct Weekly, which is, and always shall be, as I say every week, our weekly discussion show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. I guess possibly more veering towards the gaming side rather than the technology side this week. It's been, so many sort of bad announcements this week. Don't really know where to begin. First of all, joining me, Alex Battaglia.
Yeah, it's somber week, to say the least. It would have been nice to not have to talk about these things, but I think it's pretty important to, because we have something to say about it.
Absolutely. And Oliver Mackenzie, hello.
Hi, Rich. Fun to be here. Always a pleasure. But yeah, some somber news this week for sure.
Absolutely. Let's plough straight on into our first news topic, because there has been a lot of bad news this week. But we're going to start by talking about the announcement from Sony CEO Jim Ryan that he's going to be leaving the company in March 2024. In previous interviews, he cited a pretty demanding work schedule, basically like 2 weeks in America, a week in Tokyo, a week in Europe, and he lives in Europe. It's kind of been grinding him down. He's decided to retire after 30 years with Sony Interactive Entertainment. I'm going to go to you first, Oliver, on your reactions to this, because if we look back at Ryan's tenure, essentially PlayStation has never been in better health from a financial perspective and in terms of what they've achieved in the market and establishing PlayStation as the dominant console brand, certainly on the more sort of powerful side of the equation. A pretty impressive body of work, but I'm curious what you think about this, and also, I guess, about the legacy that's been left behind.
Yeah, his tenure wasn't actually super long. He started in 2019. So if you think about it, the main project that he really had oversight over during that period would have been the PlayStation 5. And obviously the PlayStation 5 has been extremely successful. I think probably people online have used this as a bit of an opportunity to take a bit of a referendum on Sony's direction over the past 5 or 10 years, which has sort of gravitated towards these really big budget games with massive development budgets made by kind of premier AAA studios. And obviously that's come with a lot of success, but I think it hasn't come without controversy as well. I think they've had an extremely good track record with their first party releases, a track record that certainly I think Microsoft is a little bit envious of. So it's a bit of a hard strategy to critique too much, but it is a very safe strategy. And they're kind of a bit of a second mover on a lot of things like game subscriptions and doing GAAS titles. So I think it's mostly a very positive legacy from the perspective of Sony's stockholders for sure. But it's also something that is going a bit still down the straight and narrow path of what Sony's been successful in.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, if you look at their first party output, it's been pretty much untouchable, I think. I mean, people look at Days Gone as an example of a title that didn't quite match the same standards, but actually think it's a brilliant game. And if that's your low point, holy crap, I think they've done a fantastic job with their first party efforts. And obviously when we start to see those first party titles arriving on PC, which I think is another initiative that Jim Ryan has kind of initiated, there's been some success there. And when we see Sony games arriving on PC, it's actually a bit of an event, which I think is testament to the quality that first party unit has achieved. Alex, what are your thoughts about this departure?
I would say a very successful career at the head. Obviously, Jim Ryan's been at Sony for a lot longer than that. Before then, almost since like the dawn of time of Sony.
Dawn of PlayStation,
yeah,
for sure.
PlayStation for sure. That's what I meant. And I would say releasing the PS5 in the midst of COVID-19 and still having it be as successful as it is. Obviously, there's a lot of inertia there with how successful the PS4 was, but there's no reason why people couldn't have also made the decision at the initial point of time then say, oh, I'll actually get an Xbox, or I'll stick with Switch, or I'll stick with PC, etc. Making the PlayStation 5 successful in spite of the economic and world turmoil that was COVID-19 and into now, I think at points that Jim Ryan did a really, really good job. I would, though also at the same time, I would really like to highlight the fact that there's been a serious change in Sony, even before Jim Ryan started being at the head of the gaming division company there. Like, the gravitation towards more prestige games, the closing of certain studios, the lack of emphasis actually on the Japanese market, which it's hard to almost fault Sony for that at times, because there's a general change in the Japanese market, more people are gravitating towards phone, Switch, and PC, oddly enough, in the Japanese market these days. So them turning away from there and having less Japanese developed games and less just Japanese focused games is not so surprising, but it's also just points to the fact that this is a much more market driven, a much more Western orientated Sony than ever before in history, I would say. And that has made it so that a lot of the premier titles that are coming out, they're ambitious from a visual design perspective. And, these are huge games that everyone's celebrating, things like Marvel Spider-Man, Horizon, but they're not exactly, I would say, ambitious from like the creative, or, I don't know if we would get these days something like Gravity Rush, or we would get Shadow of the Colossus in a modern Sony, like something that's really weird and out there. Death Stranding is the last one where I thought, like, this is a strange game. It feels like a PlayStation game in that aspect. So I think that it's hard to say how much that is Jim Ryan's legacy versus that was what was already happening at Sony at some point in time, even before he took the mantle. But that is definitely where we are right now. So I'm a little bit hard to be upset about Jim Ryan's legacy in that aspect, because I feel like that's kind of where the entire market and Sony's been going for a while now. Almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The question is whether, obviously there is this concept that PlayStation isn't the melting pot of gaming ideas that it once was. If you go back specifically to PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2 era, they were putting out diversity is the word I'd use to sum it up. The amount of games they were putting out, the amount of new ideas that they were sort of instigating in, it was just phenomenal. But we're not really seeing that anymore. But obviously the success is there that justifies this thing. Whether that's down to Jim Ryan, it's up for debate, because I'd argue that a lot of this began right at the beginning of the PlayStation 4 era.
Right.
Jim Ryan was about there, but he wasn't the head guy at that point. Oliver, what are your thoughts about that? Obviously, we've seen a very marked change in terms of where Sony is heading with its first party stuff. Do you think we've lost something? From my perspective, when PlayStation 5 arrived and we had the Asobi game on the console, it was an actual highlight to actually see something that was fresh, exciting, and was doing things with the controller that since then nobody else has really done. And it's kind of that I miss about the Sony of the past. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think it's a little tough nowadays because the economics of games, I think, are so slanted towards these big tentpole AAA franchises, and it's hard to innovate within that framework a little bit. And I just think when Sony is looking at greenlighting a big game and committing hundreds of $1 million of development resources towards a title, I think they're really conservative. Not necessarily in totally bad ways, because obviously they have very established franchises and they have a lot of very talented people working on established games and established mechanics to make them as good as possible. Like, I could see Sony doing more in the kind of AA space for sure. I think they should probably be doing more in that space. I think what they've done with VR is quite good as well. Maybe that's a space they could push more interesting concepts in as well, because that's certainly what they did last generation of PSVR, not so much PSVR 2 this generation, unfortunately. But it's a little tough. I think it's just tough to justify the economics of AAA game development while pushing out interesting new concepts. I kind of think that needs to be incubated in lower budget titles first, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah, let's take some supporter questions on this. The first one from Alex R. Davies. Jim Ryan has just announced his retirement. Did you cross paths much? What were your favourite interactions with him, and what are some of the places where we see his legacy in the video game tech of today? I can actually say I've never met Jim Ryan, right? 32 years in the business. And I've never met Jim Ryan. It's just Sony is an interesting company because it has a very sort of rigid corporate structure, right? So Jim Ryan speaks to the people that Jim Ryan needs to speak to, right? So, I understand that he speaks to our colleagues at gamesindustry.biz because that's really the kind of journalists Jim Ryan would be speaking to, right? When it comes to who speaks to us, it's typically the tech guys at Sony. and that's where we get our stories and our content from. And I guess that kind of makes sense. I suppose the concept that we haven't sort of even met him in events and stuff is interesting, but yeah, it's just not really been, it's not really a part of our beat, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
You can contrast that with Phil Spencer, who's actually, deeply invested in all levels of the business and wants to interact with every part of the business as well. I mean, there were some things from Tokyo Game Show last week where he attended and was talking to fans. I mean, that's Phil's approach, and it's not really Jim Ryan's approach. I'm not saying one's good and one's bad, but they're just different approaches. So yeah, there aren't really any there aren't any favourite interactions because there aren't any interactions, which I find quite interesting in retrospect. But I never met Andrew House either, or any of those guys. This next question from Rich, which isn't me, not really a question, just an observation that there have been several high-profile resignations recently. Scott Herkelman at AMD, Jim Ryan at Sony, and Ryan Shrout at Intel, all within the span of 72 hours. Yeah, I mean, I think there is sort of slightly different levels of importance there. I mean, Jim Ryan ran the company. You can't really say the same for
Scott and Ryan.
Ryan and Scott. Yeah, but indeed, it is interesting. This one from Matt Bertram. Hey DF! Exclamation point! With Jim Ryan announcing his upcoming retirement this week, in what new directions would you like to see the PlayStation brand head in under future leadership? Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, obviously, a lot of change has happened within the PlayStation structure, the ramifications of which we've yet to see, right? Because there's the concept of Sony making some sort of investment in the cloud. We're starting to see beta tests of PlayStation 5 titles running on the cloud. We've not had access to that yet. But one of our supporters has and says it's quite good. And I think probably more interesting and a bit more of a red flag, bearing in mind our personal sort of how we like to game. I think you mentioned it earlier, Oliver, the GAAS, Games as a Service investment, where this is something where Sony is looking to invest and is investing heavily. They've bought Bungie. They've got lots of other titles in development. Games as a Service. This could well be what could make or break the Ryan legacy, right? Thoughts?
Wow. I mean, based on what we said, I don't know, Oliver.
I think you just don't really.
I think it's interesting that Sony as a first party is trying to get into GAAS because that's typically multi-platform stuff. Which is what I think we're seeing from Bungie's Marathon, right? But I don't think all of Sony's first-party games as a service titles are reaching multi-platform. Right. It doesn't really feel like a supernatural fit for a first-party studio to be working on, because obviously those are games that are meant to, I think, bring people into a platform, and I think are meant to drive sales and engagement and sales on a console. That kind of bleeds into other products. So I don't really see that as being the purview of like a big exclusive title. I'm a little skeptical of their ability to achieve that.
Right. That's an interesting thought. The concept, I mean, obviously Naughty Dog are working on a multiplayer game, which is believed to be a Last of Us Factions evolution. You can't really see that arriving on the Xbox, can you?
No.
Or
no.
PC, possibly.
Definitely PC. I think it'll be day and date, actually, with PC.
You think that would be interesting? That would be a first for Sony. I think the games as a service thing is the big gambit which Jim Ryan has made, and it's too early to tell whether it's going to pay off. If it does pay off, I think one thing which I noted is that they have a huge level of investment in their first-party titles.
Right.
Huge. And the question is whether the return... I mean, obviously they're profitable. The question is whether the returns are actually sort of justifying the huge amount of resources and money being poured into them. And maybe games as a service is seen as attempting to bring balance maybe to the first-party portfolio in terms of having, consistent revenues. That kind of makes sense to me. I think the thing that's going to be challenging about it is, well, we've seen this week, we'll talk about it shortly, with the closure of Hyenas. It's a game that was created by Creative Assembly. It's never going to come out. It seems to be the case that these games as a service, I mean, we saw it with Avengers. you can invest a huge amount of money, but also lose a huge amount of money. So the question is whether the games are going to actually be profitable, whether this gambit is going to pay off. Right?
Yeah, I would say actually, I mean, obviously, massive AAA games that are really expensive don't always work out. But I do think chasing the games as a service model is even more dangerous than like if you're investing similar amounts of money as you would, for example, in like a Spider-Man 2 game, and maybe even more time, because Hyena was this in development for apparently, I think it was said something like 5 or 6 years, which is hard to imagine. If you're doing that, these games flop like incredibly, like almost immediately they can flop. They just don't get the traction at all on Steam. No one cares. They play the early access version and they say, this is too buggy, I don't care, and they don't ever return to it, and the entire game just goes on. In the case of Hyenas, it's not even released ever. Just not even released. And I feel like that is an area, I know this is something that they're going to be expanding into, and we'll be seeing more of it over time. The seeds have been laid. But it's also really terrifying, I would say, because these games do not have a great record. Everyone wants to be Bungie. Everyone wants to be Fortnite, but not everyone can be. And there's only like a limited space for spending and consumer time, I think, for all these GAAS titles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We got this comment from Eric Benoit. It seems Jim Ryan might be remembered for saying, who wants to play PS1 and PS2 games? They look ancient. What do you think he should be remembered for? I mean, navigating the transition from PS4 to PS5 during the pandemic could not have been easy. Yeah, I mean, this is the pandemic thing, right? Once you could never plan for it. Right, obviously. So basically things were in motion before the pandemic. I mean, March 2020, I was planning to get on a plane to talk to Mark Cerny about PlayStation 5. Literally everything changed within weeks, within days even. So basically a lot of the stuff happening with PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X was in motion. There was obviously going to be some choppy waters in terms of stuff like supply chains and actually getting the products out, and the concepts that at any moment, all of those massive factories in China could shut down. That's the sort of crazy stuff. But in terms of the products and the games, a lot of the work had been done. Obviously, work from home and game development, that's another thing that was a massive challenge at the time. But ultimately, on the flip side, the concept of lockdown meant that, well, everybody was at home and wanted things to do. So, it was kind of like a bonus in a way for people who were making entertainment at the time, that suddenly your audience was massive. I mean, it's a crazy way of looking at it, but that's the way it was. So, I think there must have been some incredible crisis management that happened during the thick of it, when you literally didn't know what was going to be happening from one week to the next. So, that was really interesting. In terms of overall strategy, though, I'm not sure much changed. In terms of this comment, that it always gets attached to Jim Ryan, the who wants to play PS1 and PS2 games, they look ancient. I think it sort of speaks to a general thing that we've always been critical about Sony, which is basically the stewardship of a library of games stretching back for 5 generations and 3 decades now, and it kind of should be treated better. We thought there might be something interesting happening with the premium tier on the PlayStation Plus subscription service, where you get these classic games delivered every month, but the emulators weren't great, and the amount of classic games being released isn't exactly voluminous, is it? So I don't know. I think there's work to do there for whoever his eventual successor will be. But in the meantime, I think Jim can look back and say, well, PlayStation has never been in better health. PlayStation 5 is just been a juggernaut in terms of sales, in terms of success, and a lot of that has to come from the top, right? So we wish him well, though, whatever he does next. It sounds like he's retiring.
Relax, please. Seriously.
I think that's all we've really got to say about that at the moment. So let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, our second news story of the week, and it is pretty grim news. We've just been talking about how Creative Assembly has basically been forced to shutter Hyenas, the game it's been working on for several years now. The axe drops, a lot of people worried about their futures. Wow, I don't really know how to react to this, but essentially yesterday it was announced that Epic Games is cutting 830 jobs from across the business. Roughly 16% of its workforce. Now, the concept that this could happen, bearing in mind the ubiquity of Unreal Engine 5 and the fact that Fortnite has been described by many as basically a money printing machine, it's absolutely astonishing. But if we look at this comment from Tim Sweeney, this memo that went out to the Epic employees, essentially he's been saying, well, I'll just read out the quote here. For a while now, we've been spending way more money than we earn, investing in the next evolution of Epic and growing Fortnite as a metaverse-inspired ecosystem for creators. I had long been optimistic that we could power through this transition without layoffs, but in retrospect, I see this was unrealistic. While Fortnite is starting to grow again, the growth is driven primarily by creator content with significant revenue sharing. And this is a lower margin business than we had when Fortnite Battle Royale took off and began funding our expansion. Success with the creator ecosystem is a great achievement, but it means a major structural change to our economics. So basically, as well as those departures, Epic is going to be divesting itself of Bandcamp, which is a music marketplace company that it just bought last year. There's so much going on here as the firm attempts to restructure the business. Alex, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, obviously, this concept that Fortnite is a money printing machine it seems to be possibly a misconception, or I don't know. It must still be making a huge amount of money, but if the concept that Epic are losing money,
I think it obviously has limits about how much money it can print, but I still think it is almost like an infinite money hole to a certain degree. It's just a matter of how quickly. I think the fact that the Bandcamp thing, like you described, they acquired it and then almost immediately divesting it, tells you that it was like there was too much going on too quickly. So obviously your coffers have to be a certain level of filled to a certain degree. If you have to immediately divest from something that you just invested in, it shows that you maybe expanded too quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what it reminds me of. Just I see it time and time again happen with Embracer. Like immediately, I remember when we were talking about all the Embracer acquisitions back in the day, Rich was like, this seems like a little too quick. This seems like a little too much. And
well, I was wondering, where did the money come from?
Yeah, that's the thing. Is like for them, it was a big question mark. For Unreal and Epic, it was like, okay, we understand where the money could be coming from at least. But still, you can still always obviously overreach. It's a possible thing to do, especially with, I would say, modern market forces that almost encourage large companies like this to start investing into areas that are not necessarily their forte. Bandcamp is probably a good example of that. I saw back in the day with Crytek, where they're an amazing company with some of the best tech in the business, some of the brightest minds. And then they started investing into things like, social media, crypto stuff.
Yeah, Crycash.
Which,
obviously, I've been making jokes about paying you in Crycash for years now. Yes.
That's what it reminds me of. Just like going out too far, investing into too many new studios too quickly. Crytek famously had they had like ones in Hungary, Ukraine, Turkey, probably Russia at some point that divested long before, obviously, the current war. All these things, So it reminds me a lot of that. And then they had to shrink a little bit. And I could see that happening here with Epic. And that's what happened. 16% of the company, almost 900 people is a huge amount of people. But I look at the layoffs, and beyond the ones for smaller teams that had obviously perhaps less profitability, I was really confused at Mediatonic, company which made Fall Guys, right? Mm-hmm. That was a huge game. massively successful. Obviously, there's the creativity there, and just they could obviously make something else like that, and they could keep supporting the game. I wonder why there was no future for those people at all. I don't understand them being cut at all. Actually, at all. I could understand divesting and maybe looking at less profitable areas, but why Mediatonic? I don't understand. And it seems like they're probably going to be losing something really good with that. And I feel really badly for those people specifically in all of this, because it just doesn't make sense to me from any perspective, actually, why they were laid off. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess the question is, have they actually made money on Unreal Engine 5 yet? Because we've had,
Oh, yeah, right.
Immortals of Avium and Fortnite, I guess. Remnant 2. There's not been obviously it's going to come good, right? Because everybody is basically jumping on Unreal Engine 5, but the actual titles that are shipping on it have been fairly minimal at this point because it's an emerging technology. But even so, there's still a massive amount of UE4 titles coming out. So I'm curious, as to the licensing situation there. They must be making a decent amount of money there. Fortnite, I can understand that obviously the economics have changed. And more broadly, I think one of the reasons why we're seeing all of these restructurings and layoffs is because, well, if we're not actually in a recession, we're probably technically in a recession, and certainly the cost of living crisis means that there's going to be less disposable income for people to spend on stuff like games. We certainly feel it, when I look at the YouTube analytics, I can see that advertising revenue has gone down significantly year on year because there's less adverts, right? It makes sense. But, when you're dealing with a company the size of Epic, and when you're seemingly investing and investing and investing, and then suddenly your revenue streams are diminishing rapidly, I guess that's why this is happening. I mean, it is grim, right? I mean, on the plus side, and I don't know if you can even consider it, considering so many people have basically lost their jobs. They do seem to have had at least some level of decency in the severance package. 6 months base pay, 6 months of healthcare, and accelerating stock option vesting. So that they seem to be trying to soften the blow as much as they can. But even so, I think there's some object lessons here in terms of the concept of just growing and growing and growing rather than consolidating and being a bit more conservative in terms of plans. Seems to be that there's a lot of layoffs happening in the business, when at the same time the amount of money that the business is generating on a revenue basis is still staggeringly high.
Right. Yeah.
Have any thoughts on this one, Oliver?
Well, I did a quick napkin math on this, and if you look at the number of people that they say was laid off and multiply the percentages there, you get a number of over 5,000 employees that were previously at Epic, like up until yesterday, I suppose. So that's a pretty colossal amount of people, even when you consider the vast amount of projects they're working on internally. It's still a bit hard to imagine that one of the biggest game-related companies in the world that operates the biggest game engine, that also arguably operates the biggest game, couldn't turn a profit off that business, right? And if the case is, hey, we grew too quickly in search of greener pastures, in search of more audience, I suppose that's an understandable problem, but it's still a little bit hard to contemplate in terms of the incredible success they've had. And the only thing I would be concerned about is I hope it doesn't derail at all their efforts on developing Unreal Engine 5, because I think that's going to be the bedrock of this generation. So I really hope that nothing there is affected, but obviously it's very unfortunate, any of the projects that were affected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does look as though, well, based on Tim Sweeney's comment, he's saying we're cutting costs without breaking development or on our core lines of business, so we can continue to focus on our ambitious plans. About 2/3 of the layoffs are in teams outside of core development. Some of our products and initiatives will land on schedule, and some may not ship when planned because they are under-resourced for the time being. We're okay with the scheduled trade-off if it means holding on to our ability to achieve our goals, get to the other side of profitability, and become a leading metaverse company.
Oh my goodness!
Whenever I hear the word, we're in red flag territory whenever the metaverse thing crops up. However, I mean, obviously, we all know how much money Meta has basically,
burnt,
yes, on the metaverse concept. What I will say is that in Fortnite, I mean, it probably is the closest that we've got to a metaverse,
for sure,
what it's trying to do. Yeah, so I guess there is something there. Investing so heavily into it, though, I don't know. I guess the creator-led aspect of it, the UEFN stuff, has been really fascinating to see unfold, and it's nice to see, at least according to this, that there is some growth there. And obviously it's built on the concept of revenue share. But yeah, the whole metaverse thing is another thing that sort of just makes my skin crawl whenever I hear it, really. It just seems like something that nobody really wants.
Yeah,
right?
A lot of buzzword, a lot of...
I think EverQuest had a great metaverse in
right?
is my perspective.
Or like Second Life. Whenever everyone talks about the metaverse, I always think about games that actually had like real people just dedicated to their entire existence. And those like older MMOs were definitely, they fit the bill 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, Fortnite, Roblox, they actually seem to be doing things that actually justify the metaverse angle. Yeah, whether it sort of justifies this sort of colossal investment and then inevitable problems later on down the road, I don't know. Obviously this is all in the context, of course, of the continuing problems with the Embracer Group, and obviously this week as well we had the Hyenas cancellation, which was a massive blow. I don't know, I just hope this is kind of like the worst it's going to get. I just can't help but feel that if Epic are feeling the pain, there could be worse to come, I mean, it has been pointed out that there's no actual apology from Tim Sweeney in this comment.
Yeah, right.
There is the question of responsibility, and ultimately he is responsible for the company as the major shareholder and the guiding vision behind the company, which is a bit disappointing. I don't really know what more I can add to this really at this time. The ramifications of this. I mean, it looks as though, as Tim says, they're looking to ring fence the engine side of the business, because obviously that's going to come good this generation. It's going to be the engine of the generation. Fortnite looks as though it's gone through a painful transition period. It looks as though there's some light at the end of the tunnel there, according to Tim's statement. But in the meantime, so many good people losing their jobs so quickly. I mean, it's devastating. I don't really know how to react to that. I just can't really relate to that. With
regards to the Hyenas thing that I'm just thinking about right now, I'm a little confused by the game's existence in the first place. And I am reminded of, I mean, I don't want to say that they're going to be the exact same, but Rocksteady's new game, it seems like Creative Assembly, they made, obviously they've made it the Total War series, they've RTS specialists, but they also made Alien Isolation, an incredibly well-made, atmospheric first-person single-player game. And then all of a sudden wanting to go into this extraction shooter territory. I almost doubt that the game was always an extraction shooter. I would imagine it was some sort of GAAS shooter, looter shooter that then transitioned into an extraction shooter at some point, because that was the latest, hottest thing. And I'm like always terrified by these things where you take a studio that is so good at doing what they do, and then you're like, let's make an extraction shooter. Let's make the next Destiny. And that is so dangerous and so risk filled that I feel for everyone, obviously, that lost their jobs. But like, I'm really curious what the creative decision making was to make another extraction shooter. So weird. So weird.
Well, bearing in mind how long it takes to make a game, it was a calculated bet, just like any game development, I'd imagine. But obviously the surrounding environment has changed. I think there's also this concept that possibly there's only a finite amount of players with a finite amount of money to spend, right? And, just continually piling on new games into the same arena. Something's got to give. Something else about the Epic business model. Obviously, there's been a huge amount of money spent on the battles against Google and Apple. There's also been the colossal investment in the Epic Game Store in an attempt to create some sort of alternative to Steam. I guess the amount of money that was being spent there is, some might argue, unsustainable. I'm curious. I mean, it's not mentioned at all in Tim Sweeney's statement as to the impact of those particular things on the business and whether it can continue. I mean, the Epic Game Store does seem to be continuing to get exclusive content, must be paying through the nose for it, giving away free games. Alex, this is quite an interesting one. I mean, this is just for my personal curiosity. What is your view on the Epic Game Store years in now?
Years in now, I still see it as in missing functionality and missing usability that is found on Steam. Right. Regardless of whatever games are available there or not available there or anything like that. I'm just thinking about like basic user functionality. If you have a lot of games on the Epic Game Store and you have it sorted or unsorted and you click on the library by accident, good luck. Seriously, it'll take an eternity to load. If I have all my games there on Steam, and no matter what sorting or thumbnail type, if I click on the library, it'll load really quickly. That is a huge usability issue, and it's still there. It's been there forever. And there's a lot of other things too that I could talk about, but just like basic usability things, no one touches Steam for some reason, because they're all about thinking about, they're thinking about growing market share by getting hot titles and hot ticket titles, which is what they've done in the past. That's where you could originally get things like Control, and any other tons of the games that have launched Epic only. But they're not thinking about, why do people stick with Steam? Like, there's got to be some other reason other than the fact that people just think Valve is a cool company or something like that. It's not the reason why, I don't think. So yeah, I think they need to invest, instead of worrying about exclusives, they could invest a lot more in the UI and the user experience.
Yeah, it does strike me as somewhat odd. I mean, it is, I guess, a function of the fact that it is was a company with 5,000 employees, but they can generate something like The Matrix Awakens. But when I try and use the library area of the Epic Games launcher, even on my 13900K, I try and load a game and I click on it, I've got no idea whether it's actually going to load or not.
Yeah, see, I'm happy you know what I'm talking about, because this is the same issue I had with the store. The Xbox app is now a lot better. I've been using it recently. It's a lot better.
Yeah.
The store, though, still has the issue where you click on something, the Microsoft Store, whatever it's called these days. You click on it and you just have no idea actually if it started going.
It's that little bar on the left where you have your list of games in the library.
Yeah.
If I click on a game, it's maybe 50-50 as to whether it will load or not, or maybe it's just taking ages to load. You get that cloud sync prompt appear, and then you're in business. But it's actually, I mean, I really don't like having to have game icons on my desktop. But for an Epic game, or a game rather that's installed under EGS, I do have to use those desktop icons, because double clicking on the desktop icon at least improves my chances that the game is actually going to load.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is absolutely baffling, isn't it? Just how bad the experience is on the Epic Game Store launcher. And the fact that they can't get that right, that's baffling to me. When you see that level of innovation, I mean, the volume, in terms of the movie industry and what they're doing with Unreal Engine, and I can't load, it's 50-50 as to whether a game is going to load on the Epic Games launcher. Oh, man.
Yeah, there's even more stuff I could complain about there, but we should maybe do that in some other episode.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on this one, Oliver?
No, not too much. I think it's unfortunate news for sure, but yeah, I mean, layoffs in the games industry just seem to be happening like every other week now. Huge layoffs, huge studios getting taken down. And yeah, I am worried about the possibility of some kind of economic recession that forces the game industry to divest assets. That would be very unfortunate, but yeah, not too many thoughts.
I mean, traditionally, it has been said that the games industry has been recession proof because people need things to do.
Right.
But I just think that there's a combination of factors here. Obviously, the come down from the pandemic, cost of living crisis, economy in turmoil, something's got to give, and even the games business is not proving immune, especially when there seems to have been this massive attempt at growth across the whole industry. That's, chickens are coming home to roost now. But yeah, it's all pretty depressing. Let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, so there's a major marketing beat this week for Alan Wake 2. A lot of people posted new preview footage. We didn't actually get to see the previews of it, but that's absolutely fine. A lot of people did. There's a lot of assets out there. Remedy provided their own assets to us. It looks, Alex, as though rather than concentrating on the absolute super high-end experience that we enjoyed at Gamescom, it looks as though the focus here has essentially been to see what the game looks like on consoles, or rather, I did speak to Remedy about this. It looks as though all of these assets are the PC version, but running at console equivalent settings.
Right.
And we've seen some 30 FPS media, we've seen some 60 FPS media, but it seems to be, again, the PC version. We've also had news from Remedy that there's going to be a performance mode. Although the game was targeting 30 frames per second, it looks as though they've found the leeway to do a 60 FPS mode as well. Where do you want to start on this one, Alex?
I think it would be kind of good to start with what I saw at Gamescom and explain a bit about the game a little bit, because people still don't know what Alan Wake 2 is. It is not Alan Wake 1. That is for certain. Oliver just did a video on Switch port updates most recently talking about Alan Wake 1. How about very special, very dark, linear experience, I would say, the first Alan Wake. This game, Alan Wake 2, seems it's even darker. It's even, I would say, more disturbed than the first game. And I'd also say it is much more non-linear than the first game. It reminds me a lot of Resident Evil 2, the remake. And that is all very good, because Resident Evil 2, the remake, is an incredible game. It's actually my favorite Resident Evil game. And here in the game, you're switching off between Alan Wake and Saga Anderson, two different characters, kind of exploring the same plot beats to a certain degree, but maybe in different areas of the game. And you're switching on and off between them and trying to piece back the puzzle of how to get Alan Wake out of his little mental black place that he's been ever since the first game. So very atmospheric, also cerebral, and also it's connected to all this Remedy universe games. So there's references to Control, there's references to Max Payne in there, there's going to be references to Quantum Break, and it's all looking really, really good. And one of my favorite things about this footage that we saw, and I don't know if it was necessarily the case in the first Alan Wake, is that the guns and the shooting looked awesome. I don't know if you saw the moment when we got some footage on screen here. Saga, this is 30 FPS footage provided by Remedy, using a double-barreled shotgun. The sound of that shotgun and the violence that it makes on screen was awesome. Very big fan. Remedy, they make character action games, third-person shooters with such level of fidelity and finesse. I only think that Alan Wake 2 is going to be amazing when it comes out. Based on, I saw a 40-minute unscripted preview footage of it at Gamescom, uncommented at anything. It was just someone playing the game for 40 minutes. And it was the path traced version on PC, though, so it looked different than this. But everything I saw there was just like, this game is going in the exact same direction I would have loved to see Alan Wake 2 go in when, they announced it. And it's going to be amazing, I'm pretty sure. I'm definitely going to be covering this super hardcore on PC. But Oliver, I've only seen the PC version with like great fidelity up close in person. What is your take here on this console settings footage we have?
Yeah, so just right off the bat, I watched some footage online, and it's very obvious that these demos aren't being shown off with path tracing.
Yes.
I think apparently we have some information that they're being run at console equivalent settings, which makes sense because the shadows looked very rasterized to me right off the bat, and there's obvious screen space reflection artifacts. So very clearly not the path traced version. In terms of the rest of the visuals, I think it looks really, really good. In general, the asset quality is super high. The lighting looks great. There will be some concerns with this footage, and if it is indeed console level settings, there are some things that I'd maybe want to see improved. Like there is some image breakup on camera pans. I sort of wonder whether they're using their own in-house temporal AA with upsampling that they've been working on over the years, or if they're using something like FSR2. I could really see either way. I also notice some bad artifacting on character hair and things like this.
Right.
So that'll be interesting. One other thing of interest on this is that they're talking about adding a 60 FPS performance mode to the game. And if you go back to Control, that was 1440p with RT reflections at 1440p, or 1440p with raster at 60 FPS. So it's a little interesting here. Here it might look like we're getting a raster-only experience, or maybe something with RTGI or another similar, a little bit less obvious ray tracing feature, because I'm not seeing obviously evidence of RT reflections.
Right.
And the other thing that's a little bit interesting to me is that their communications director was talking on Twitter about the addition of 60 FPS mode, and someone asked him if it was going to be a lock 60 or 60 with more of a variable unlocked frame rate, and he said we're still working on it. So it does sound like hopefully they're going to get it to that level, but maybe they're setting expectations that it might not be a perfect 60 all the way through, which I think is reasonable given the level of visual sophistication on display, but might not be ideal for our purposes.
Right.
Yeah, I'm just reading the Eurogamer preview, and they were talking about bugs during their preview gameplay, and they hope they get those sorted out. Yeah, I think adding a 60 frames per second mode this late on in development is probably what people want to hear, right? Because, obviously whenever a game is touted as being 30 frames per second, it doesn't go down particularly well with certain parts of the audience. I just hope everything comes together in time, right? I mean, certainly everything we saw at Gamescom from the past-faced experience just looked absolutely like the state of the art. I suppose moving from path tracing to consoles, the golfing capabilities of the hardware here is such that something's got to give, and I'm sure judged by its own merits, it's going to be a phenomenal looking game. I think the overall reaction people are having to the preview event is certainly very, very positive. I just can't wait to play a Remedy game again, because Control, whenever I test a new piece of hardware, Control is still one of my go-to games. Just because of everything it does, and just the fact that I can just love playing it.
I think you can just pick it up and play it. It's really fun.
Yeah, and I think this is actually something that began with Alan Wake. The sort of chronology of Remedy games, starting with Alan Wake going forward. You mentioned it earlier, the gunplay stuff has just got better and better and better from game to game to game. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they've got with Alan Wake 2 here. And and it's going to be a showcase visually. The question of how they're going to have to compromise on consoles. And obviously, I think they've been talking for a while, been quite vocal about the challenges of Series S as well. It's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Maybe the sort of cutbacks that were necessary for Series S have helped to make the 60 FPS version on the other consoles more viable. That's interesting idea. Guess we'll have to just wait and see what they've got lined up. But one thing I'd like to stress as the manager of Digital Foundry is basically that Alex has basically prioritized Alan Wake as his game of October. It doesn't matter what else is happening.
I just keep saying,
when Alan Wake arrives, that's it.
That's it. It's all over. I'm excited for it. What can I say? Because I wasn't super pumped before I saw the presentation, the live presentation of the game, because I didn't know what to expect of it gameplay wise, and what they showed gameplay wise was like straight up my alley, and it was just nice and weird and quirky and also creepy at the same time. It hit all those beats that I was really looking for. I'm also like you, Rich and Oliver, very curious if they're gonna have ray trace reflections on console in one of the modes, because it was there in Control, but obviously I would say the world detail level is much higher in Alan Wake than what we saw in Control. I mean, there's, that's like the brutalist architecture there. It doesn't actually need that much detail in a lot of the scenes. And here with the things like the forests and the saga sections of the game, as well as the stuff I saw that takes place in like what is a fictional New York, in my preview version of the game, was ridiculously dense. Like in terms of the amount of stuff that was just on screen, it was really up there. So I could imagine maybe they couldn't ship it with RT reflections if that was the case, but also like what are the limitations on a 60 FPS mode that Thomas was mentioning there, like that they're still working to get to 60? Is it like on the CPU side? Maybe is that the GPU side? I don't know. I'd be curious.
I mean, we can't wait to see more on this one. I mean, the mission statement of Digital Foundry is the state of the art in gaming technology, past, present, and future, right? And this is encompassing two of those. You know, with the past-facing version, it's the future. With the consoles, it's the present. And just the concept of a new Remedy game arriving is just it's just mouth-watering. So yeah, I share your enthusiasm, Alex, and I'm really happy that basically you will be relentless in your pursuit of Alan Wake review code.
Yeah, I will.
And coverage thereof. Yeah. Let's move on to the next news topic. So it was announced this week that Horizon Forbidden West is getting a complete edition. It looks as though we're getting a PlayStation 5 version very soon, which will bring together the core game and the Burning Shores DLC. And there was the announcement, the welcome announcement, that it is indeed coming to PC. And we don't have to wait too long for it. It looks as though we'll be seeing the game early next year. And it has been confirmed, oh happy day, that Nixxes will be developing it, which I think you basically predicted that weeks ago, Alex. I mean, it is logical if you think about it.
Makes sense.
Well, obviously the PlayStation 5 side of things, it's a Game of the Year edition. We've seen it before. There's probably not too much to discuss there. Maybe there'll be some nice little tweaks. But the PC side of things, well, we've got this question here from, let's start with this one from DarkRod99. Hi DF, now that Horizon Forbidden West is coming to PC and is being co-developed by the awesome Nixxes team, what are you hoping to see in this port? And is there any other games you want PlayStation to port to PC that can take advantage of the full power, the best of the best PC hardware? Have a nice day! Exclamation point. This one from Leftist Hominid, the Horizon Forbidden West port announcement unfortunately did not mention anything about cross-save. Are there any technical reasons for the lack of cross-save that you can think of? Or is this just Sony being Sony? If they had cross-saved, I would have rebought both Spider-Man games and then rebought Horizon Forbidden West on PC. It really seems like a missed opportunity. I kind of agree with him there.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think Alex, the thing that's slightly frustrating is that it was essentially an announcement. It's coming to PlayStation, but there were zero details of the PC version. Obviously, we're in danger of moving into wish fulfillment territory here, but what do you expect to see? I mean, there are basics that we expect to see from the PC port. You know, basically good scalability. Nixxes are the masters of that. We expect to see enhancements beyond the standard. Obviously, unlock frame rate, ultra-wide support, all of that is a given when there's Nixxes involved. But what else do you think we can expect to see? And what might be too much to ask for?
I would say we should expect all XeSS, DLSS, FSR, including FSR 3 and DLSS 3 frame gen, both of those frame gens. We should expect them because Nixxes has made it a priority to add those into games, their current games, and they try and use the latest version possible usually. So we should expect the highest quality there for every single respective one. I would also, the thing is both with Spider-Man and so even if we go back to Spider-Man, that was their first one they worked on as like fully invested. It was Sony. Yeah. It was the first one that came out.
They picked up the pieces of Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yeah, they picked up those, but that, different story. But there they even made sure to push the settings higher than you could do on the PlayStation 5 version, whether it was, just like smaller things like pushing out the view distance a little bit, pushing out the shadow resolution. But they also purposefully added it in a higher resolution RT reflection mode and a like higher quality RT reflection mode, which wasn't at all there. They had to do all that work themselves. And so I'm curious whether or not they will do that with Horizon Forbidden West here, because they have the opportunity. Maybe they had the time to do it because they've been working on it for, obviously, they've been working on it for more than a year, I'm pretty sure, based upon the timelines. I would be really curious to see if they did have the time to do that. And if wish fulfillment there, I would like to see some form of ray tracing in the game. As to which one would benefit the game most, I even joked about it on Twitter. I was like, RTGI would benefit the game most. It has a dynamic time of day. It's mostly open worlds, overlapping structures. But whether or not they can ship that is an entirely different question. But smaller ones like they did for Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and most recently now with Ratchet & Clank was doing AO, ray trace ambient occlusion, and ray trace shadows, which are less disruptive from the art perspective and less labor intensive. So maybe we can expect something like that, which would be like additional niceties. Presuming, once again, my fear, though, always with the Sony ports is I saw it a little bit with Spider-Man Remastered. I saw it to a certain degree with, my God, what's the name of the game that I love? Returnal. And I saw it most recently with Nixies. Nixies with Ratchet and Clank. Is that the title, there's a lot of great foundational work there, but it almost feels like it's out 2 to 3 to 4 weeks early. Than it really should be, because there's like low-hanging fruit issues that really arguably shouldn't be there. And I hope they don't do that for Horizon Forbidden West. I do not want to have to make a complex video explaining issues. I'd rather make a 20-minute long video that is all praise. You know what I mean? So, right.
Yeah. What do you reckon of this announcement then, Oliver?
Well, I would hope that this title in particular actually would hopefully come over in a little bit better shape, because this is a really, really well-behaved PS5 title. In terms of, I would have to imagine CPU usage and scalability, judging from what you can get out of it unlocked, totally unlocked. So I'd hope for like an equally docile PC release. But in terms of the visuals, I'm completely on board with Alex that I'd like to see some sort of RT support, because the PS5 version is already like really, really good, even relative to what you might expect from a good PC. You have a 4K 30 mode, a 4K 40 mode with CBR, and an 1800p 60 mode with CBR as well. And the game looks great in all those modes. There are unlocked options as well again. So it's a game that does not really seem like it's begging for a PC port. Obviously, to bring it to a bigger audience, that would be great, but it seems like to add an additional substantial visual feature on top of that, that would really like justify the PC version in my eyes. Right. But outside of that, it's a pretty exciting release. It's one of the best looking games on current gen consoles. The Burning Shores expansion in particular looks fantastic.
Clouds.
So yeah. And I'd also hope, just on top of that, I'd also hope we could get some tweakables on the image reconstruction solutions, some sharpening. I don't know what they would bring there, but just to get us more of that like really pin sharp look to the image construction, because that's something we had in the initial patch with this sort of limited TAA, in the initial patches, I should say. But then I think in June of last year or so, they updated the game with a revised TAA method that was ultimately a better TAA method, but it did soften the image somewhat, and it reduced some of that really nice pixel precise image detail. So I'd sort of hope that we could emulate that a bit on PC with maybe some revised image construction or limited anti-aliasing methods.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I mean, I guess one thing about Nix's ports is that you get the gamut of upscaling and therefore anti-aliasing technologies. It will have presumably DLAA, which would be phenomenal.
Yeah, that'd be that pixel pristineness that you'd be looking for. Yeah.
And thankfully, you do have a high-end GPU.
I was going to say, Oliver, what do you want on your PC?
I do get the point that leftist Hominid is raising, though, that there isn't much interoperability between the PlayStation and the PC versions of their game, and actually cross-save just seems like a no-brainer. I don't understand why they don't do it.
I have a guess.
Maybe they should do it, right? Because the ability to basically pick up and play your Sony games wherever you have the hardware to play them just seems like obvious. They did have that PlayStation launcher thing, which doesn't have that functionality. It just should have launched with it. It's kind of bizarre.
That's it. They don't have the infrastructure like Xbox with Microsoft has, and if you're not an Xbox title, you build your own infrastructure on the side. There's GOG cross-save plays on like Cyberpunk now.
I mean, even Ubisoft is doing it. You know, you can take your game saves across various platforms. It just makes sense, right?
It would. I think it makes so much sense to do it from the PlayStation perspective too, because they kind of see PC now as like a new extension market, and like have allowed people to tie it back into their console experience would be just a benefit. I think it would let people play on console too. It seems weird they're not even ever doing it at all. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, it's an ongoing project, clearly. Hopefully we'll see some progress there. Let's move on to the next news topic. Okay, so this one's interesting. It's been announced this week that if you want to play Resident Evil 4 Remake on the iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max, you're basically going to be paying full price for it, $60. Now, Oliver, you've just bought a new iPhone. You're really excited to playing these games on your phone. What do you make of this price point? I mean, it's kind of excessive based on mobile gaming prices, but at the same time, there's more to it than that, isn't there? I think is the bottom line.
Yes, I have an iPhone 15 Pro right here.
Ooh.
So I'm looking forward to hopefully playing some of these games in due course when they're released later this year. But yeah, I think the pricing question is interesting because I think it depends on whether you see it as a console game or a mobile game ultimately. To me, I see it as more of a console game. I think people are used to paying very little upfront for mobile titles, and they're not so used to just the pay-to-play game model that we see so much on consoles. But I think given the fact that most phone games nowadays are not so good with their monetization, including efforts from like Square Enix with their new Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis game, that game has awful monetization. So I think that this is a good move. I think the exception in mobile gaming at the moment, at least in my eyes, would be Apple Arcade, which is very similar to Game Pass. That has some very good games on it, but most games are not shipping in a very good state, in a state that's interesting to me or a lot of other primarily console or PC gamers, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd prefer to have these releases at full price than not to have them at all. And I also think something that helps ease the pain in this situation is the fact that the $60 price refers to an in-app purchase in this case. So you actually get to play a substantial portion, we don't know how much, but a substantial portion of the game will be made available for free. So you might play through like the first chapter, right, as a free download, and then have to pony up if you actually enjoy the experience, which I think is totally fair. For that $60 price, you get the game across all iOS platforms, so iPad and iPhone, and also Mac computers as well. To me, at least, I think it's totally fair.
Same.
Fair enough. Well, we got this question from Everyone's a Winner. Hey, DF team, trying to understand who Apple sees as the market for the AAA games on an iPhone thing. The tech seems super cool, but the business model doesn't yet make sense to me. Is it for folks who only play Fortnite on their phones, who then realise they can get a USB-C to HDMI cable and a controller and have a living room gaming experience without needing a console? That idea seems kind of a stretch. But in the same right, I can't see anyone actually wanting to play RE4 with phone screen touch controls on the go. It just feels like it's all missing something as a plan going forward for Apple to stick with. I think the plan is fairly straightforward, and it is to it's early days, right? But the idea is to basically consolidate an ecosystem, right, that encompasses all areas of Apple. They've done it with the silicon, right? Why not move it into games and where you can play them? So, you know, the M1, it started with the M1, I guess, on the iPhones, where we actually started to see the fact that Apple was rolling its own silicon in the laptop space and then into the desktop space. Okay. And there's a huge degree of functionality. How can I explain it? It's the same technology essentially rolled out to different platforms. So the idea, I think, is quite compelling to a developer to say, hey, you know, let's get this game out. It's not just for Mac, which has a very limited market size, but also for iOS, which is huge. So even if only a certain degree, you know, a small amount of people actually buy the games, it does increase the concept of viability on the iOS and macOS platforms. I think that's actually quite compelling. In terms of the the USB-C dongle and the touch screen controls, Oliver, you can have controllers that work with iPhones, right?
Yeah. Basically, any controller that supports Bluetooth works really well with iPhones. I actually have a couple like sliding controllers that fit the iPhone in between, like a kind of Switch tablet, right? Mm-hmm. And those work really well. I think it's totally fair, especially with these newer iPhones. Actually, the display out to a TV is actually very good. Like it's uncompressed 4K 60 video out. It's really, really strong. So I don't know. I would kind of push back on the idea that this is a bad value necessarily. I think people are used to one model for phone games, and this is just another model for phone games, right? If you don't like that, that's fine. But these are console titles, presumably being delivered at good quality on a cell phone, which I think is very exciting and also something that people should be prepared to pay console prices for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that has there been any battery life tests with this?
Oh, I'm sure you'd only get like judging from the wattage off the iPhone SoC, you probably get like 2 or 3 hours of screen on time with it. But so like kind of like Switch-ish battery life, OG Switch-ish battery life, I presume.
Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff. I guess we're going to be looking at that now. You've got the hardware. We'll be looking at that as soon as we get access to the game.
Yeah.
I'm interested about the video output. You talk about uncompressed 4K 60, but surely the games are being scaled, right?
Yeah, the games aren't running at 4K 60. They're basically running by default in the exact same mode as you get on the iPhone. So that means you get kind of like this this ultra wide presentation on a television screen with a bit of letterboxing, sort of like a 21:9 scale image. It's roughly in that vicinity in terms of the aspect ratio.
Right, but
so it is a proper square image, but it
Right.
is a letterbox a little bit. But it's actually sort of interesting as a kind of hybrid console to me. I was thinking about this a little bit recently because it's a good console on the go. It's sort of like a Switch. And then you plug it into a TV, and it really is just so easy with any of the dongles I've tested. It's a perfect 4K 60 output if the dongle supports it. And then you get a really good experience on the TV, and it's so much more powerful than a Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
Like the same games, Fortnite, Wreckfest 2 I was testing, all these games running so much better than they would in their Switch versions, right? So that's a little bit exciting, even though the variety of games is relatively limited. It's so much more powerful than what Nintendo can deliver at the moment.
Yeah, the whole pricing thing I find a bit baffling. I mean, you can be dropping $1,000, $1,500 on a phone, but you don't want to pay for the games. So, meanwhile, you spend like $400, $500 on a PlayStation 5, and you're ponying up $70 a time. So yeah, it's baffling, but there it is. But yeah, I think from a Digital Foundry perspective, I mean, we're really excited to actually just see the deployment of ultra modern mobile silicon playing AAA games. We want to see what it does, right? And how it compares to the other platforms. And I'd like to see more games, obviously. Just for my own personal curiosity to see what the iOS silicon can do. And obviously Apple have been doing a huge amount of work in terms of modernizing their whole development ecosystem. And I love the idea that we're going to be seeing Metal FX AI upscaling on a phone.
Right.
Yeah, I mean it is right about up there with DLSS 2 in terms of quality, at least in No Man's Sky. It looks really, really good. And obviously we saw Resident Evil Village on Mac. I covered that in October, I think, of last year. That obviously looked superb. So I think they are pushing that in a variety of titles. I think that's definitely the key to unlocking really good visuals on this class of hardware.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, well, stay tuned because obviously we'll have Resident Evil. I think it's Village that's the first game, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, we'll be taking a look at that as soon as we can. Let's move on to our final news topic. So, Alex, this one is really fascinating. People have noted that looking at the Steam page for Batman Arkham Knight, the beta branch has been updated with a patch_test branch, suggesting that this long dormant game is actually going to get some sort of update. And obviously, you are Digital Foundry's custodian of Jensen's prophecy, which did hint at a quote-unquote RTX remaster for Batman Arkham Knight.
Yeah.
Again, we're in proper danger of moving into wish fulfillment territory here.
Yes.
But what do you make of all of this?
I mean, I don't want to say it's Batman Arkham Knight RTX. Because that would be too much. I don't want to say. I don't want to even be a record of saying that. But
it's too late.
As Oliver pointed out before we started recording this episode, I didn't even realize that there's a Nintendo Switch port coming out. I have no idea that was the thing. I'm very curious to see if that runs because, just going through the city in the Batmobile is like the Batmobile tank, the Bat tank or whatever they call it. It's a disaster on like lower end PCs of the era, and Switch is definitely not as faster than those lower end PCs in terms of like what you can do on the CPU there. So I'd be curious to see what the heck that's gonna be look like. But what I could imagine is that the work they've had to get it running on Switch is just a broader re-release effort of this title. And it'll include perhaps a patch for the PC version, which in my humble opinion should be free because this game was a disaster on release, and it still is somewhat disastrous to a certain degree in its default form. And it could use an update that fixes the frame time issues that when you run around the city. This is something that's why I always complain when a game comes out on PC and has big frame time issues because it can take a decade or longer before the game gets in any like a reasonable shape. on mid-range PC hardware, and I don't think that's right. So I would like to see it actually being that. I mean, RTX remaster, Oliver can talk about that, but like for me, I would just like to actually see the game running well in the default form.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the way we left Arkham Knight was that essentially 60 frames per second was doable, but simply because the hardware of the time had basically reduced the frame times to the point where when you did get a spike, it was still within a 16 millisecond window. So you could get 60, right? And then you would let the GPU do the rest in terms of scaling the visuals. I think 2080 Ti could do 4K 60 basically with a decent GPU. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see Arkham Knight revisited, obviously, with, stuff like DLSS would be amazing. We are moving into wish fulfillment territory here, but why not? I mean, on the console side of things, I'd love to see a remaster, not just for the Switch, but also for the current generation machines, because you can. I mean, it's basically a game that's been limited by the original platform and the technology of the time. It's before TAA was really a thing. The anti-aliasing's pretty gruesome.
It is. It's just FXAA, really.
Yeah, but the core artwork is still phenomenal. The game is still phenomenal. What are your thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, well, I want to dive right into wish fulfillment with this one, because if it is indeed the RTX remaster that Jensen once prophesied, that is extremely exciting, because I think it'd be pretty mind-boggling to have some path tracing going on in a game with as many dynamic lights as Arkham Knight. Like, it would just look absolutely insane. I'm just convinced it would totally look up there with the best of current generation rendering, because that game still looks awesome even on a PS4, Xbox One. To see it at high resolutions with a temporally stable image, which we've never really gotten out of the game except unless you have it on a high-end PC, with RTX effects everywhere with path tracing, I mean, that would be insane. So yeah, right. That's just super tantalizing. But I kind of look back actually a little bit to last year when we had the Portal companion collection on Switch, which I think I covered for us. And that was developed by NVIDIA's Lightspeed Studios. And then, some months later we had Portal RTX. So I kind of am hoping that the existence of the Arkham trilogy for Switch, that actually suggests that there's some ongoing work with that code base. And so maybe that's being tapped into by multiple studios and multiple teams. And potentially there is some work on modernization for Batman going on. So I'd hope that Jensen's prophecy is going to be fulfilled. And this patch certainly suggests at least that there's something going on. I don't know what's going on, but something's going on. When there's smoke, there's fire, right?
Well, there's a screenshot here from the Steam database showing that patch_test was updated 4 days ago. And then prior to that, the last public patch was 3 years ago. So hopefully, I'd like to see that patch_test actually be like RTX remaster, path traced extravaganza, but unfortunately not. I mean, it could just be who knows what it could be. It could just be like an update for compatibility with Game Pass or something, who knows. But I'd love to see much more going on there. And obviously the game itself remains phenomenal. And it would be a money-making machine, right? Because, the concept of an updated version of that game, I'd be on there day one for sure.
Yeah.
It's a phenomenal game. And the concept that, a Switch version is coming proves that the game isn't being left behind.
Yeah. So it's one of those games like Assassin's Creed Unity that I think exemplifies some really excellent rendering on 8th gen console, but it came out quite early into that console's life cycle, which makes it, I think, all the more interesting as a little artifact of that time period and as an example of what a talented developer can do even with like UE3 and pushing it to ridiculous levels. Right?
And like you were saying with, I don't want to be wish listing here, Ben, but like back then I've always joked about it, but it's true. If you actually play the game, take a notice that there are no shadows from the moon, by the way, in the game. The game doesn't actually have global lighting. They just do a really good job with their art and a lot of local street lamps to give you shadows in most scenes of the game. But imagine if the game actually had like modern lighting in it. A lot of scenes would look even better than they did before. Like back then, that's before SSR, they were using like really big hacks to even get any of the reflections in the game. Like UE3 level of Samaritan level hacks to get reflections in the game, like from Batman and the enemies in the cars. Like, imagine those with like real reflections now. Like, wow, the game would look ridiculous.
I have to say one other thing too on the topic of reflections is that game's water.
Oh yeah,
Which
right.
still looks just mouth-wateringly good. Like
Some
so
of the best
good.
watering
Just
games. Yeah,
some of the best watering games, even still, and it's been like over 8 years now.
it's nuts.
So imagine that game on PC with tessellation turned up to the max with ray tracing. I mean, that would just be ridiculous.
I would like to see it, man.
It's so exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's even on the table, it's so exciting.
To quote Jeff Keighley, it would be literally insane.
Literally insane.
Well, look, perhaps we're reading too much into patch underscore whatever test. Yeah. But, you know, what can I say? It's a slam dunk, isn't it? Something's got to be done with that game to modernize it, because it deserves it. I mean, of all the remasters, it's well up there with Assassin's Creed Unity as a game that should be, you know, that comes from a certain point of time in the last generation and was just kind of left behind. When, you know, obviously there could be a massive market for a modernized version of the game, fingers crossed. But I guess we will be looking at the Switch version as soon as we can, because, similar to what Alex has said earlier, the concept of getting that game, which was incredibly CPU limited and kind of still is, running on a mobile piece of hardware like that. I mean, it could be great. It could go horribly wrong. Fingers crossed it's going to be good. But that's enough of that. Now let's move on to supporter Q&A. This is the part of the show where we take questions on our Patreon every single week, and I collate the best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer. And we're going to go into, I think, 2 questions. We might as well put these ones together. Since the topic of conversation is Cyberpunk 2077. This first one is from Ed K. Hi DF! Possibly late to the party on this one, but I'm curious to know what your opinions are on Cyberpunk in terms of CDPR moving forward. They seem to have taken a flawed game with many technical issues and made it into one of the best tech/graphical showcases for the quote-unquote current generation, and also for PC. Clearly, they have a very talented team working on the Red engine there. My question is, when they move to Unreal Engine, do you think they'll have the same ability with that engine to drive standards like they have with Cyberpunk, or will they be limited by quote-unquote black box parts of the engine they won't have access to or improve? Thanks and love the show. This one from Galaxy Goer. Hi DF, Cyberpunk 2.0 is the last hurrah for the Red engine, and future projects are moving to UE5, but as UE5 doesn't have a real-time path tracing feature, do you think we'll miss out on their next title having path tracing? Maybe they could work with Nvidia for a solution. Or do you think the next consoles in UE5 will have path tracing feature support? Thanks and keep up the great work! ! This is all about the transition away from Red Engine to Unreal Engine, essentially. And there's a lot of question marks here. I think just today we saw a tweet where it was highlighted how good CPU utilization is in the Red Engine, and it was contrasted with how poor it is in Unreal Engine 5.
So good.
Yeah, Alex, thoughts on this one? I mean, it's going to be a transition of sorts. It's going to take years. And all I can hope really is that all of this stuff, the deficiencies being pointed out here, is down to the fact that it is a work in progress. And hopefully there should be improvement.
I'm hoping that CDPR's engineers are doing key enhancements and changes to UE5 that get poured back into the main branch, because if they made a game as such, like, it's like so incredible to actually load up the 2.0 update, or even 1.65 before that, 1.63, because it's one of the few like open world games that you can just like load up with like the super dense city environment. You just drive through it at full tilt and you don't see frame time issues, unless you're obviously on like a CPU that is lower end. Like the Ryzen 5 3600 will see CPU frame time issues there, because it just literally can't keep up. It's like fully saturated. But if you have a higher end one, you know, like higher core, a new Ryzen, you're going to having like amazing frame times. And that's something that's really awesome to see. Even though, like, if you have to think about it, when the game's path tracing, it requires the entire BVH of every single thing on screen. It's not doing screen space shenanigans there. It is literally the entire game being rendered and then also existing in a BVH structure and possibly being updated every frame. Like, the amount of CPU and like then the AI on top of that, it's like all so threaded and so awesome that it is sad to see them going to UE5 for that reason. But what you're saying here, Ed K, there's no part of Unreal Engine 5 that is going to be black boxed. It's on GitHub. You can download the entire source code of the engine. they can change anything they want from it. And talking with people on Twitter most recently, and the fact that NVIDIA is advancing their own branch of UE5, they will 100% have a path tracing renderer in their next title on PC, regardless of the fact that they're moving to UE5. They've already done a lot of the work, and that code is portable to UE5 because it's the rendering aspect of it is, at least. And NVIDIA already has their own branch where they're moving in that direction anyway, where they have things like RT, direct illumination using Reester. They're moving towards updating. Even Epic is actually moving towards updating UE5. Right now they use like the surface cache and screen probes for their GI, which is, cheap, low quality, works on consoles. But they also, in the most recent main branch on GitHub, they updated it with an experimental Reester GI, like the NVIDIA Tech GI that you in the main branch, so not even in the NVIDIA branch. So even Epic is looking at updating that stuff. It's just the thing I'm a little worried about is over time is, my goodness, they have to solve UE5's poor CPU single-threaded performance, as well as solve the issue of how you just move. Yeah, sure, you can sit in a single scene, whatever, game runs fine. But if you move around any world in UE5 game, it's stutter city. So like, they got to fix that, and that's like an Epic thing, hopefully with CDPR. I don't know.
Thoughts, Oliver?
Well, I saw some funny tweets on this a few days ago. Someone said they're moving from the best game engine to the worst, which I wouldn't agree with that. But
yeah,
I
know what you mean.
And then I also saw someone post a benchmark of the game just running on the E cores with the P cores disabled on, I believe, the i9 13900K, and the game was still running at like 70 FPS somehow. It's just that well threaded. It's not at all like loading up one thread with a workload that would cripple an E core. I mean, the E cores, they're so weak on the
yeah, they know they're like, aren't they the equivalent of like Intel? What gen are they equivalent to? I think they're worse than
they're equivalent to Skylake gen, but they are relatively low clocked. Right?
That's the thing, right? Yeah, they're not like 5 gigahertz. They're like 4.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was such a scalable. I mean, Red Engine, at least in the form that it was deployed in Cyberpunk, is ridiculously scalable, and UE5 is just the complete opposite in terms of reliance on that render thread. Really piling it up. So I hope that they push it in a more scalable direction there. But I think in terms of features and in terms of what CD Projekt Red does with UE5, I think whatever they produce will be terrific. And I do agree. I think they'll have a path tracer in there for sure. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to it, even though I do worry about the reliance on third-party technology, just in terms of that CPU scaling, really.
Just one last thing I want to say is that one thing that UE5 will bring them that their current Red Engine doesn't have is that on console you at least get... the GI is fine in the current version of the game without ray tracing or path tracing, but it could be better, right? And that is something that UE5 will give them, either in software or hardware ray tracing mode. So if you're playing whatever their next game is on console, like an Xbox Series X or PlayStation 5, you'll be getting much more similar lighting quality to PC in that version if it's using a UE5, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I think one thing was mentioned in the Witcher announcement for The Witcher 4 and the mooted transition to Unreal Engine at that point was that it was a two-way process, right? So CD Projekt Red would be bringing their own technological expertise to the table there, and hopefully that would eventually resolve in an Unreal Engine that's better for everyone. And maybe there's some sort of commercial arrangement that reflects that input. Hopefully it's not just PR, right? Hopefully we will be seeing something there. Before we move on from Unreal Engine and Cyberpunk 2077, we do have this question from Struggling Shader. Hi DF Crew, exclamation point. After a lot, and I do mean a lot, of Cyberpunk coverage, we still don't know how the console settings compare to the PC's presets. So since Oliver and Alex are on the panel, I'd like to ask for how the performance mode in console compares to PC Ultra settings with no RT. Are there any obvious cutbacks, especially after the increase in CPU requirements from patch 2.0? Also, has Cyberpunk 2077 overtaken Rise of the Tomb Raider as the most covered game in DF's history? If not, what are the most covered games in both minutes and number of pieces? I think Cyberpunk's probably up there at this point.
Right.
I'm going to take this question because a bit of an initiative that's happening behind the scenes at DF at the moment, which we haven't really talked about at all, but has been facilitated by the supporter program, is that we have a new background staff member contributor, let's say, who is actually working on a freelance basis simply to go back and look at the games where we never did console equivalent settings and actually deliver them. And we've got that happening with Cyberpunk. And we'll be doing some content with that soon. And I was going to see whether I could bring up the
list.
Yeah, I can. The list, Cyberpunk. So I'm just looking at the Cyberpunk settings now, and it's quite interesting to see. Well, performance mode it's a mixture of medium and high with a touch of ultra. There's also some low in there as well. That's the performance mode. Obviously, no ray tracing. The ray tracing mode equivalent is basically fidelity is increased across the board, and it's basically a mixture of medium, high, and only the decals get ultra settings.
Yeah.
Might as well put that information up there now as a nice. Perhaps Oliver can render a nice table there so you can see what the performance modes look like. But basically, the whole idea of doing this is that obviously we like to generate our own optimized settings, right? But the point is that for every single multi-platform game that is out there, the developers are doing it themselves. They're producing their own optimized settings that we see on the consoles, which is their own determination of the best bang for the buck. And a lot of the time, I think you'll agree, Alex, that it's unerringly close to what you come up with for optimized settings.
Yeah, it's usually like I'll have maybe one or two differences. One of them is always like anisotropic filtering, like you're going to turn that up on PC. And then there's a couple times where developers, like, they're obviously making decisions, but sometimes I'd say, like, for my preferences, I would prefer to give a bit more, have a little bit less performance to prevent like a common artifact, for example.
Yeah.
And then I'll say that in the video though. So
yeah,
but they're usually, that's why they exist. They're trying to get as much visual bang for the buck as possible on lower mid-range hardware of yesteryear. So
yeah, I think another point I'd like to say is that the presentation of a console game is quite different to PC. So typically in a PC gaming environment, the screen is right in front of you, whereas in a console environment, you're typically in the living room. And this does mean that artifacts would be more noticeable on the PC side. So it kind of makes sense to actually improve fidelity just to eliminate some of the stuff that you can probably get away with on console. But yeah, at the moment, we've basically ascertained the console equivalent settings for Fortnite, Cyberpunk, The Last of Us Part 1, Baldur's Gate 3. That actually did roll into the coverage. We had our guy, Mohammed Ryan, is in the background doing all of this stuff for us, and it feeds into main content as well. Jedi Survivor, where I was quite interested to note that when I asked him to do it, I just saw a tweet from him on Twitter saying, the PC version's still a disaster.
It's still Garbo.
I felt kind of bad at that point, asking him to look at it. But I was really interested to see how the performance mode and the quality mode stacked up on PC. And he went back and looked at it again once the game was updated. So there were some tweaks there, and just because all of the legwork had been done on the PC version, we had a bit more of an insight into what had happened on the console version. A lot of the custom settings tweaks they did were just replaced with standard PC presets. So this is work which I've commissioned. Also because I want it to go into GPU reviews. I just think if you've got basically the main thrust of game development being centered on the consoles, having access to where those console versions sit in relation to PC is an invaluable tool in ascertaining how your next GPU purchase could relate to a PlayStation 5, for example. Something we started in the 4060 review, but I want to do it more and I want to do it better, and having all of these settings to hand rather than sort of broad guess is is hugely valuable work. So, yeah, really interesting stuff there. Okay, next question from Christian Buchel. I'm sure Alex can correct me on that German pronunciation.
Buschel. That's it. Not too far off. Not too far.
Here's the question. You talked about the possibility of NVIDIA in the next-gen consoles, but do you think an Intel, PlayStation, or Xbox is a possibility? Wow. In some aspects, ray tracing, machine learning, Intel seems to be ahead of AMD. They just lack a bigger GPU, and a lackluster driver isn't an issue for console adoption. Oliver, I'm going to go to you for your thoughts on this.
So I think there are a few things to say about this. The first thing is that it's sort of contingent on NVIDIA delivering next-generation GPU hardware down a few generations down the line, which it's easy for NVIDIA to, or rather, sorry, for Intel to say that they're going to deliver this hardware. But in the past, they've not followed through on their GPU commitments, right? Famously with Larrabee back in the day, I believe. So that's part of it. The other part of it is it's not down to hardware strictly. It's down to, I think, when we talk about the idea of an NVIDIA-led console, for instance, it's down to a combination of the hardware and the software engineering experience that NVIDIA brings. So that's not just in terms of basic things like APIs, but also obviously in terms of the DLSS suite of technologies and NVIDIA's market leadership on that front. So I think that Intel is probably not going to be pushing as far in those directions. I'd love to see more interesting stuff from Intel. Obviously, they don't have a frame generation equivalent from them yet. I expect probably something like that is coming.
Yeah, they're working on it.
Yeah, but I don't really expect that they would be in quite the same position as an NVIDIA to really deliver something that would be a market-leading design, is basically my opinion. Not just in terms of hardware, but also the software side of it, which is very, very important.
Okay, Alex, thoughts?
I would love to see this just from, I like the fact that it would be a more diverse console marketplace, because I'm a little bit bored every single time across. I mean, it's probably better for the developers just in terms of ease, but like it's a little bit boring when it's just like the console versions are more or less the same. The boxes are just different for their exclusives or lack thereof. I would like to see Intel there. I just like the one thing that they showed with Arc is that they're spending a lot of transistors to get performance in a level that is not like the equivalent transistors you'd see on AMD or especially NVIDIA. And part of that maybe comes down to process. Part of that also comes down to the unrefined aspects of Arc that I think could be a lot better with a dedicated team looking to see how they could get it into a console. But that's all pipe dream. I honestly don't think Intel's going to be in a console anytime soon until they have a proven SoC out there somewhere else, and that is somewhat console-like. And then maybe developers would look at it and be like, okay.
They're doing some crazy stuff in terms of packaging now, in terms of like multiple chiplets and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Which is great, which is awesome, but it's not really conducive to a good console. And I think going back to what you were saying, Alex, transistor count, or rather the concept of area, silicon area, it is a weakness with Arc. The chip is relatively huge compared to the performance you're getting relative to what NVIDIA and AMD are doing. So yeah, I think that's the problem, right? And then going back to the more broader concept of NVIDIA entering a console, they're spending a lot of transistors on stuff like ray tracing cores and machine learning, and yeah, the question is the extent to which that is actually valuable within a console SoC. Now, Nintendo are obviously going for it with T239 for the Switch 2. There's going to be a lot of ray tracing hardware in there, and potentially there couldn't be that many games with ray tracing. So it's really tricky, right? It's basically on the NVIDIA side, it's the question of whether you're going to get value from your transistors, which is crucial in the console space. And then on the Intel side, they're just so far behind in terms of actually getting an efficient design compared to the competition that could be something that takes several generations to fix. So I don't think we'll see it anytime soon, but it's certainly an interesting concept, right? I'd be taking a look at their next generation laptops to see what they're doing. I mean, when you look at what the complexity of Meteor Lake, it looks pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, right.
But at the same time, it doesn't look like a console SoC. Hashtag just saying.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next question. This one from Gatti. Can we get back to the Microsoft leak just one more time, one last time? One of the slides included a handheld-like console icon in the roadmap. If we consider for a few seconds that the next Xbox is a handheld, wouldn't those key specs about ARM64/Zen, P-Core and E-cores and quote-unquote cloud hybrid make actual sense for it? And for such a portable device, maybe that wish list of next generation ray tracing and AI frame upscaling generation is actually interesting. Oliver, what do you think about this one? I mean, I just think they're going to leave it to the PC audience, the PC OEMs, ROG Ally, all of that sort of stuff that's happening. It basically solves the problem for them, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And not to spoil this one too much, but when I was reading through the document when it came out, they actually did say in the document that handheld was quote unquote outside the scope of first party, which presumably means, just as you suggested, that they're leaving it up to their third party partners and devices like the ROG Ally to fill in that gap. And it's not really the place of Microsoft, I suppose, to deliver there. So I don't really think so. I mean, I think that if they were going to deliver a handheld as part of this pitch, they probably would not designate it as being outside of the scope of first party, and they'd also probably include it in the slide deck. I think that'd be a very crucial part of their console. I think they'd probably be content to leave that to the cloud because it just seems like an easy thing to just shuffle away and say, well, you can stream it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what they're going to be doing. It's just a shame the cloud solution isn't really that hot. I mean, something I have seen quite a few times now is the concept that Series S is like a stealth handheld concept, which is that a few die generations, a few die reductions down the road, you've suddenly got a handheld. It's not really the way it works, really, and you've still got this really power-hungry GDDR6 memory at the heart of it, which just wouldn't be good for a handheld. If you look at what ROG Ally is doing, that's kind of more viable, but even so, you're still nowhere near Series S performance.
Right.
Really? I mean...
Not really, no.
Interesting idea, but Xbox handhelds, I think, this is one of the key strengths of being part of an ecosystem that includes PC. You get all of the handhelds that are happening there for free almost, even if the actual devices don't really have the finesse of a first party solution in the vein of like Vita or PSP or whatever. It does the job, right? Job done, really. And you can stream from those devices, of course. Yeah, so there we go. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Horsell. Hi DF, thanks for the entertaining weekly podcast. I think that's quadruple exclamation point there.
Yeah.
With the upcoming release of the Lenovo Legion Go, do you have any opinions on it? And the ROG Ally, I'm thinking of dipping into the handheld PC space. What's your take on the longevity of the hardware? This change is coming for me as I'm worried about ownership of games that I purchase going forward, and there doesn't seem to be a clear customer focus from Sony or Xbox. Maybe I've missed something. Thanks for all the great content. So I did actually see the Lenovo Legion Go recently. There was a press event in London. It looks like a really interesting device. It's huge. I mean, the ROG Ally it's quite svelte by comparison. This thing is proper chunky. Has detachable controllers like the Switch, but much larger. They're much chunkier. Also, one of the controllers can kind of slot into a base to turn it into like a mouse. If you can imagine that, if the Switch controller thrust into like a circular base that then acts like a kind of mouse. It's quite an interesting concept. It's going to be releasing at the same price as ROG Ally, $700, and there's a lot more to it from a hardware perspective. But Oliver, you're all in on this because you bought a ROG Ally.
Yeah.
What's your take on this? I mean, I guess from my perspective, the worry is that every year, 18 months, AMD is going to produce a new APU. And then, it's just like an arms race that's never going to end.
Well, I don't know about that. I don't know about that because in terms of the AMD APUs and their advancement, they went from 7 nanometers in the Steam Deck to I think 4 nanometers in the ROG Ally, and the 4 nanometer process is it's a spin on 5 nanometers basically from TSMC, and the difference at the same wattage was actually not that extraordinary. So I'm not sure if that reflects declining advancements in lithography, which we're certainly seeing, or something that's specific to AMD's products, or something that's specific to the differences in the implementation between the Ally and the Steam Deck. But I don't think we're going to see that massive of advancements in this area at these wattages. I think we're basically in a certain band of performance, and I think Valve probably recognizes that by choosing not to ship a Steam Deck 2 very quickly. I think they recognize that they're going to be power limited with whatever they ship if they wanted to reach a higher performance level than the Steam Deck. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. Personally, I'm a big fan of the Ally. I love that the layout is super comfortable, like with the analog sticks and more of a regular region relative to the Steam Deck, and they're kind of normally spaced and sized. I love the VR screen with 120 hertz support. It opens up so many things in games that you couldn't achieve on the Steam Deck. And I love the level of hardware power you can squeeze out of it when you push it to 25 or 30 watts. I love all those things. The Legion looks like a cool device. It is very big.
It is.
The screen resolution's very high. It's 1600p, I believe.
Yeah.
And so those things I'm not as big of a fan of, but I'd definitely be interested to see how it works in the real world.
Yeah, it looks really interesting when I saw it. Unfortunately, the controllers weren't working, so we couldn't actually play games. I could just sort of get a heft of the device, and it's chunky, that's for sure. I mean, I really like the level of innovation that's happening in the handheld space. There's so much choice, especially with all these Chinese vendors joining in with really high quality devices. I guess the one thing, wholesale, to bear in mind is that I've yet to come across a Windows handheld that's got good battery life. What are you doing there, Oliver? Are you playing plugged in, or just have like shorter gaming sessions?
Well, I have like various batteries and stuff like this.
Right.
That can, but so at 30 watts, it lasts for about 50 minutes or so with max screen brightness. So not long. But I would contend that if you're playing like a AAA game, like I was playing Starfield on it the other night, and you're getting 1080p with FSR2 performance at medium settings, 30 FPS, like a way better experience than the Steam Deck, which could only really push like 20 FPS.
Yeah.
FSR2 performance at 800p or 720p. It's like a quote unquote console level experience. Like it's sort of similar to console settings, but in a miniaturized form factor at lower resolutions. Mm-hmm. And that's great. I mean, I think it's fantastic. And yeah, you do have to push it to 30 watts to get that. But, do you really want to be playing AAA games with anything less than the best possible performance on a power limited device like that?
Right.
I don't know. I think you might want to just plug it into the wall a little bit more often, or have some extra battery packs lying around. Because realistically, to me, the difference, like the difference between an hour and a half and 50 minutes, it's not. You need a battery no matter what, pretty much in these things.
Fair enough. Yeah, it might be worth looking into a good battery solution then, which is something we've not really considered. But yeah, I mean, there's so many great handhelds coming. One X Player have one coming as well. The Ayaneo Kun is coming as well with a massive 70 watt-hour battery in it. You'd hope that there would be some attempt, at that point to actually get decent battery life within the contained unit. But yeah, I mean, ROG Ally, it is a good machine. What can I say? And that screen really is interesting for overcoming one of the key limitations, which is it's really difficult to get consistent frame rates above 30 FPS in a lot of games, especially AAA titles.
Right.
ROG Ally has a lot going for it. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Andre Serles. In your recent discussion with Brian Catanzaro from NVIDIA, future developments appear to be iterative. From a hardware perspective, is it actually a good time to purchase a high-end GPU, or should we wait until more of these revolutionary features slow down? Well, this is quite interesting. I was quite interested to see, actually, a lot of people picked up your DLSS roundtable, Alex, and specifically this idea of DLSS 10 having completely influenced graphics, which was a concept that he threw out there, which seemed to turn into headlines.
Yeah, that's the nth degree goal for it, and I think that was what Brian was saying. He said 10 as like, he just threw out a number. He wasn't actually saying it like that to speak for him. That was the obvious intention there. I think whether or not it's iterative or not in the next future developments is hard to say, because we had frame generation come out a year ago, right? Yeah. And that was pipelined for about 5 years. And ray reconstruction was pipelined for about 3 years and came out this year. and it's going to be iterating a lot over time. That's why I said that in the video. I was like, we're looking at the first iteration of it, and I know just because the AI model, they're going to be just constantly doing changes to it. But what else have they had in the pipeline that we haven't seen, or maybe we have seen in just small bits, that is going to be coming out with the next batch of GPUs? I couldn't even guess at this point, because I didn't expect ray reconstruction. I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition, it was just like, I didn't notice it. And frame generation, I didn't really notice as well too, until it came upon us. I don't want to say buy something right now or buy something in the future, because you won't be left out in terms of features, because I honestly just can't know that. But I think NVIDIA is not sitting on their laurels, and I'm pretty sure that whatever we saw this year, whenever they launch RTX 5090, 5090, I'm pretty sure they're going to show off something new that we didn't expect then, because they keep on pushing the software as well as the hardware with each of these launches. Right, Rich? So I would expect them to actually show off something new then that we didn't expect now.
Yeah, there were leaks this week about the 5090 specs, 512-bit memory interface, massive increase in SM count. It's going to be massively expensive as well. I think maybe the thing to bear in mind with high-end GPU at the moment is it's got to be about pricing. I hate to say it. Obviously, everything from 4070 Ti upwards shipped with big pricing. Well, everything shipped with big price increases.
Right.
I think prices have got to stabilize. That obviously we did see with the arrival of the 7800 XT that competition can actually drive down prices. 4070, 4060 Ti, they saw price reductions, right? The question is, how much performance do we need? And the 4090 is still vastly underutilized in a lot of cases, unless you've got a 4K 120 hertz screen. So there's a lot of leeway there. I'd suggest that that you don't really need the best of the best to constitute a high-end gaming experience. 4070 Ti actually does everything that the 4090 can do at 1440p. So if you imagine, I actually ran the numbers on this. A 4070 Ti at 1440p is astonishingly close, in most cases within 3% one way or the other of a 4090 running at 4K. So, in terms of what a high-end GPU experience is, it's defined a lot by whether you're going all out, whether you're using optimized settings, but also your resolution, right? I think the funny thing about frame generation, Alex, is that it's the effects aren't really scaling with resolution, really. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's the case? DLSS, obviously, the more input pixels you put in, the better. But frame interpolation is basically, it's whatever the beginning and end frames are either end that determines the quality of the middle one. So it shouldn't really...
I was finding out pretty easily. There should be probably little things that are a little bit different if you were to do... I didn't do it immediately, like a 4K versus a 720p and seeing how much better it was. It probably is obviously a little better, because the amount of pixels it's working off of, it can maybe identify features better. But one thing I did point out in my original DLSS 3 video, not the original one, but the one that was the review, is that the input frame rate was the one that could actually determine image quality of the output frame rate. If you recall that, I showed an instance in Cyberpunk 2077 where it was ultra performance mode DLSS at 4K looked better at a real native 120 hertz in terms of the aliasing than it did on with DLSS 3. So I'd say that is definitely the case. We're seeing it much more. It's much more important what your base frame rate is than what your resolution is. That's what I would determine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Frank Ritter. Given how even worse than before Twitter has become since Elon Musk took over.
Oh my God, yeah.
Have you as a team and/or privately considered switching to alternative social channels like Mastodon? Despite being not in the media's focus anymore, the platform is thriving and has, in my opinion, a much more welcoming community than Twitter. I think welcoming an open and decentralized system would suit you well. You could even set up your own DF instance /server with only quote unquote official accounts of yours. Oliver, what do you make of this whole social media meltdown, and should we be decamping?
Oh man,
Yeah, right.
I don't know. Elon. Well, just the other day he said that he was going to make you pay to post, or
that would be the end.
That would literally be the end. I wouldn't want to do that. Yeah,
right. Now maybe it's going to be verification to post. I don't know. The whole thing seems. I mean, it's he seems to be quite intent on just immolating his 44 billion or whatever it is. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think to me the question would be: is there a service with critical mass, right? Because Twitter, for all of its faults, or X. I'm so embarrassed even saying that.
I don't say
Twitter, it's just so embarrassed. But yeah, Twitter, for all its faults, everyone's still on there. A lot of my friends are on Blue Sky, not so much Mastodon, but Blue Sky is quite popular with some of my cohort, and I think that's a good service. But again, it doesn't have that critical mass of posters that I'd really want to see. Obviously, there's that Threads, the Instagram linked Meta one. But again, that doesn't really seem quite as slanted towards the journalistic types, and also it's probably not reached that critical mass yet, even though it has a lot of users. So I'm kind of waiting for something to either take up the reins of Twitter or for Elon Musk to no longer be in charge of it is my hope. But
right,
thoughts on this one, Alex?
I don't want to switch services immediately at all because everything that Oliver said was very pertinent to my case. Also, there's the mass of followers that I've gathered over time that like outreach is actually pretty important when we post a video. I think it actually does drive a lot of people to our videos. There's a virality there that it would be another building process on the other platforms. And also in the interim time period, like if there was a switch that has occurred, and it may have to occur based upon all the things Elon Musk is doing, it would be like, I would love to have like one text input that posts to all social medias, like the equivalent of like some sort of super media thing that I just type into and it posts to everything. I would love that. I would do that right now, actually, if I could. If it made me Instagram posts, if it made me TikTok posts, if it did that, I would do that.
It used to happen. There used to be social media aggregator platforms.
Yeah,
the social media platforms didn't like it. Obviously. Well, my thoughts on this is basically, let's be honest, Twitter's the only game in town, right? The other sort of things that have sprung up, it seems to be there just isn't really a critical mass of people actually moving over to these other platforms. And so, the whole point of Digital Foundry having a Twitter account is basically to, tell people about what we're doing or to ask questions. And the more people you have in the audience, the better. Now, it may well be the case that some of Elon Musk's plans will, basically kill that audience off, and then we'll have to think about doing something else.
Yeah.
All I will say is that if you want to have a welcoming community, DF supporter program on Discord is amazing. I mean, it's a valuable resource for us. We get some amazing questions. We get some amazing tips. It's just a really pleasant place to be in a way that Twitter could never be. But in terms of Twitter, just the sheer basic audience involved makes it really difficult to move somewhere else. But maybe Elon Musk will basically make that decision a lot easier for us in the fullness of time. Who knows? But in the meantime, I guess, well, we can flirt with these other systems, but it seems to be the case that when you do, there seems to be a groundswell of people moving to like Blue Sky or whatever. But then, they're still posting on Twitter and nobody's really watching you or reading your stuff on the other platforms. So it doesn't really have that much appeal. Let's move on to our final supporter question for the show. And this one is from Minion. This question's for Oliver. If your TV stopped working tomorrow, would you convert to the OLED master race or buy another LED LCD TV? I'm just going to intercede here, please.
Yes.
Let's not use this master race stuff, okay?
Yeah, let's leave it.
Google it. Right, find out where that term came from and ask yourself whether you want to be associated with that kind of language. Spoilers, you won't be. Anyway, would you convert to OLED or buy another LCD TV? Also, this one is getting slightly sort of oddly specific and personal. Also, you should grow your hair out again like you had in your sophisticated pose Twitter pic.
Sophisticated.
Oliver, didn't you buy an OLED TV? Or I've got that wrong.
That's John.
So I was considering it.
Right, okay.
I was considering one earlier this year. I decided against it. But I actually do own an OLED TV. I have an LG C8, the 2018 model OLED.
Okay.
And so I have very specific tastes in displays that seemingly run counter to everyone else's taste in displays. I like that display, but it had a lot of what I would call OLED grain, where you see on a static color, right? You see inconsistency in the brightness between pixels, which just bothers me way more than it should. But like on static elements, like on the Xbox dashboard, where you see that kind of like dark grays and it just looks awful, like that OLED grain. I don't like it at all. The brightness level wasn't good enough as well. I like really bright displays, and I went right back to a VA LCD, which have really bright panels, 500 nits, all white, beautiful, beautiful displays. I really like those bright displays, and you can't get that in OLED. You just can't get that in an OLED because of the brutal ABL, automatic brightness adjustment on those displays. But I was considering some OLEDs earlier this year, and I was looking through it a couple months ago. And I was looking at the LG G3 and the Samsung Q90C, and basically they had kind of mirroring problems, where the LG G3 was very bright, but the brightness wasn't good enough in game mode with HDR. It was great in SDR, but and regular HDR, but bad in game mode HDR. The Samsung Q90C had great game mode HDR, but bad SDR. So ideally I want an OLED panel with no compromise, with both of those characteristics.
With the brightness you're looking for, specifically.
Really good brightness.
Okay.
And otherwise, I'd probably consider a high-end QLED with maybe variable backlights and a really good brightness.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So I'm very particular about those things.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the hair, I just cut my hair short. I still have all my hair, thankfully, but I just buzz it every week or so, because I normally my hair, if I grow it out, but if I grow my hair out, it just becomes a huge afro. It just becomes
really
that's
huge
cool looking
curly,
though too.
yeah.
I think afros are cool.
No, I don't. It's very unpleasant, so
Okay.
I prefer to just buzz it.
Well, I think Minion here is just looking for some sophisticated poses.
I suppose so.
Well, that's it. I guess we can leave it there.
Leave it there.
That's the end of the show. So if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for whatever notifications may emerge. No guarantees there. And DF Supporter Program. Join us. Join our amazing community. Early access, bonus materials. A ton of stuff going on there. I mean, I'm working on a couple of projects at the moment. There's already bonus material videos there for the higher tiers where you can see what I'm up to. This is really exciting for me because I could actually elicit feedback on my projects as they're being worked on. It's really interesting. That's all from us for this week. One more thing, you can find Digital Foundry Direct Weekly as a podcast on all of your favourite podcasting services. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching.